Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Cash That. This is your host, Joe Dellera, and this episode is once again brought to you by our good friends at Rhythm. Rhythm is the number one betting tool that you need to have in your pocket. It is powered by an AI driven model, and it helps you in terms of your betting. Not only are they giving you projections for spreads, totals, money lines, etc., they're also hitting you with player prop projections. So even if you're not really sure where you want to go, you can use their tools and their modeling to help guide you and guide your research. And if you're just a hit rate guy, if that's all you want to see, if you want to see the like how many times this player has hit this line in X amount of games, they have that too, along with the projections all in the app with a difference to market. So it's their edge relative to the market. And that kind of can help guide you and say, like, oh, this is a good bet because there's some value here based on the way that we're modeling it, based on the projection. And you can get that for an entire week for free with the link in the bio here from our Cash That link. So use it. It's going to help your betting, helps me out on a daily basis, and it's something that you definitely need to have in your back pocket. Now, for this episode, we're obviously going to dive into the Wednesday NBA slate, but I did want to talk about a couple different things as well. So I'm going to give a little bit of a roadmap, so that way, depending on what part you want to listen to, you can kind of go from there. But we'll start with the NBA with the best bets. We'll run through the slate, and then before we get to pods and recs, I want to talk a little bit about account health and some of the better way or some of the ways that you can kind of keep your account open. That can be from like a variety of different things, but it's a way to kind of try to avoid some limits, and it's a way to be able to get and maintain access to a number of different books. So that's a little bit of the roadmap for today. We're without producer Corey, but producer Corey's doing well. Like he's questionably sick. So we'll get into that a little bit more though in pods and recs. But looking at the Wednesday slate, we've got a number of different games. Obviously, the NBA Cup was today. I'm recording this right now. It's like the fourth quarter of the Spurs and the Thunder game, and about halftime in the Lakers game. Spurs look like they might actually take this one from Oklahoma City. It's 103-91 right now. NBA Cup is fascinating, and there is a lot of opportunity to kind of leverage some of the games and some of the options that can really happen here, right? So, like looking at what we kind of bet on today already, right? So we bet on the Celtics to win the group, and I'm trying to find if there's odds now. I'm trying to refresh a little bit. But basically, we bet on the Celtics to win the group. And in large part, the reason why we bet on the Celtics to win the group was because if they beat Cleveland, which they did, the number was kind of wrong for the rest of it, right? So nobody seems to have a lineup right now for it. I would imagine that it's going to be at worst like plus 100 or so now, which really wasn't in line with what the money line price was for this game against the Cavs. Obviously, there's a little bit more variability when you have to add in more games over a course of different days. So that's a factor, but still, that's one of the ways that you can kind of try to make some money on these games and on these cup bets. So I wanted to touch on that specifically because there are some circumstances here now where we're looking at some of these groups, and there might be a little bit of an opportunity still to buy on a team. For example, the Houston Rockets play against the Portland Trailblazers, then they play against the Minnesota Timberwolves, and then they play against the Sacramento Kings. The Rockets are 2-1 to win the group, even though right now they're 1-0 with the best point differential already. Sacramento already has a loss. Minnesota already has a loss, and they're considered favored. They're higher. They have better odds or shorter odds than they do. So you've got the Timberwolves at -120, the Rockets at +200, Trailblazers are 8-1. They're also 1-0. The Kings are plus 1,000 right now because they lost to Minnesota. But because Minnesota already lost to Portland, it's created this little bit of an opportunity maybe for like a three-way tie. So I think that Houston right now probably has the toughest schedule of the remaining teams. Or no, Portland does, but that's because Portland I think is the worst team. So it's kind of a tough tougher way to put this, right? But Sacramento, in a way, at 10-1, probably has a little bit of value just because even though they're 1-0, their loss was in overtime. So they have a 0-point differential. Oh, this is what I meant to get into. Minnesota, on the meantime, they're 1-1, but they have a negative 14-point differential. They lost to Portland. They beat Sacramento. Minnesota would have to win out against Houston and the Clippers in order to be 3-1 with a chance to probably advance. Sacramento also has to win out in order to have a chance, but they kind of would need a little bit more of like a three-way tie situation. The reason that I like Houston and Sacramento, though, is that it's both of their last games against each other. Houston is the home team in that game. And I think it's likely, I would say it's more probable than not that those two teams at that point are both 2-1 and 3-0. I think Houston could be 3-0. Sacramento could be 2-1. And if we have a ticket or like a long ticket on on both those teams, I think that could create a little bit of an option for us, or a little bit of room to grow in this group. Just projecting like what we're looking at here, the Clippers can obviously play spoiler to a lot of these teams, but I think that Houston in particular, even at the 2-1, is particularly undervalued based on what their like advanced metrics look like. So from an advanced stats perspective, from an adjusted net rating, Houston is 5th in the NBA at plus 4.7. They're 12th in adjusted offense and 3rd in adjusted defense. So the fact that we're getting 2-1 odds on them right now to win the group when they're giving Minnesota the shortest odds because they play Houston and the Clippers, I think that that's off. It's off to me. I don't think that that's really I don't think that this is a great line for Minnesota. Minnesota, I don't think should be favored in this group right now. So it's creating value on Houston and on Sacramento, in my opinion, because I think that those are the two best teams. Sacramento is obviously dealing with some injury stuff, but it definitely is something to look at least at 10-1. It's an extremely long number on FanDuel for that. Now, looking at West Group B, it looks like the Lakers are going to take it home tonight against the who the heck are they playing? Against the Jazz. And then it also looks like Oklahoma City is going to drop this one to the Spurs. That is really, really, really going to open this up for LA and set them up to be a little bit more in the driver's seat. Obviously, that game, which would be Oklahoma City's next game and the Lakers' last game in this tournament, will be interesting. But it does set up a situation where the Lakers still pretty much have to win that game against Oklahoma City, because even if the Lakers win this game, they win their next game against Phoenix, then if they don't beat Oklahoma City, they would lose that head to head. So they really need to still almost win out, or at least win this game against Phoenix, and then hope Oklahoma City loses to the Jazz. But it's kind of an unlikely situation. Granted, we thought it was unlikely that they'd lose to the Spurs, but especially without Wemby. But here we are. So what the point of all this, and the point of what I'm trying to get at here, is that because these groups there's only so many outcomes that can happen here. There's only so many different permutations of the wins and the losses in these groups. The odds are moving in a way that isn't totally consistent with what the process is, or like what the next steps are. So when we looked at these odds, like when Boston was plus 350 to win the group before this game against Cleveland, it was almost looking at it saying like, okay, well, you're 0-1, you lost to Atlanta, and Atlanta's 2-0, Cleveland's 1-0, so we have to put you behind them. And especially because especially because Cleveland has been so good this season. And I don't feel like the numbers are aligned with the game theory of like, okay, well, if this happens, then this happens, and then what other things do we need here? So it's creating value in the market. And I do think that there's going to be some more opportunities to bet once we get a couple more of these odds up, and we might even go back to the same group the same group C and see if there's something that we can do there now with Atlanta, Boston, and the Cavs. So we'll kind of, I'll keep you updated on what I'm doing, but I'm just trying to explain some of the back end of what I'm thinking about when I'm putting out some of these cup bets. All right, but now let's dive into the Wednesday slate. Looking at the Wednesday slate, we've got a number of different games. The first of which that I want to talk about is the Chicago Bulls versus the Milwaukee Bucks. The Bucks are 8-point favorites against the Bulls, and the player that I'm looking at to really go off in this game is Giannis Antetokounmpo. Giannis, his points line is set at 30.5 right now, which is admittedly a pretty high line. However, I don't believe that it's high enough against the Chicago Bulls team. The key for me here is not only is Chicago's defense just atrocious. Chicago has the 5th worst adjusted defense in the league, but they're playing at the number 1 pace in the NBA. And it's a pace up spot that's really like so significant. They actually average like 1 possession more than the next closest team. The difference between them and the Memphis Grizzlies is the same difference as the Grizzlies to the Hawks, who are in 3rd. And then from there, we have to drop almost all the way down to like 5th or so. But it's a significant jump in pace to go play the Chicago Bulls. Now, it's even more significant here because the Bulls, or the Bucks rather, play at the 15th fastest pace in the NBA. So it's a pretty significant pace up spot. And it's a spot as well that Milwaukee like really needs to get their shit together, for lack of a better word. And Giannis, there's conversations about how happy he is or what the situation is. At the end of the day, he's always going to go out there and he's always going to seem to put up numbers. And he has really, really done so against this Chicago Bulls team over the past couple of seasons. He's shred Vucevic, and he's hit this line of 30.5 in 9 of his last 10 games against Chicago when playing more than 10 minutes. There was one game in there where he's played like 9 minutes. I don't remember what exactly it was, but I think he got hurt that game or there was some issue. So like I said, he's a clear engine to this offense, and it's a matchup that Chicago just really has no answer for. So last game when he played them, or last time he played them this season, he scored 38 points, just crushed them. And when you look at it, the biggest thing is that Chicago, in terms of defensive shot distribution, they allow the 4th most mid-range attempts, and they allow the 2nd most rim attempts in terms of frequency, of like overall frequency of the shots. And they're allowing their opponents to shoot 67.1% at the rim. That's the 2nd worst mark in the league. So not only are they allowing those looks, they really cannot defend them at all. So this just aligns so perfectly for what Giannis does in terms of his game plan, in terms of the way that he scores, the way that he gets to the rim and just attacks. I have to go with this over 30.5 points. You always wish it's 29.5 so you can end on that even number of 30, but 30.5 is just too low. And that line is available right now at the time of this recording at DraftKings, Caesars, and BetMGM. All right. So I want to lean Milwaukee in this game, but I just have no faith in them to cover an 8-point spread against anybody. So I'm gonna have to stay away from that a little bit. Looking at the Pelicans versus the Cleveland Cavaliers, obviously the Cavs lost a tough one today, and we'll have to see because it's a back-to-back. New Orleans obviously has New Orleans played today as well, so it's a back-to-back for both teams, which always creates like a little bit of an interesting spot, right? It always creates a little bit of an interesting rest spot for these teams. Like, did you rest one game? Are you not going to rest this game? Obviously, New Orleans got their asses handed to them by the Dallas Mavericks today. Cleveland played a very tough game, probably a little bit of a letdown spot. Both teams are traveling. So Cleveland is traveling back from Boston. New Orleans is traveling to Cleveland from Dallas. So no team really has like any type of rest edge aside from the fact that the Cavs are going home, which isn't necessarily a good thing. Like, sometimes you got to do your shit when you get home. You got to take care of your dog. You got to take care of the family. You got to take care of whatever you got to do. As Sean Little always likes to say that. He's like, you get back home, you got to go to the crib, talk to your family, talk to your girl, like whatever. that can sometimes be a problem, and it takes up your day, it takes up your time, and then you're not always ready to go to start these games. I will say the one player that I would look for in this particular matchup, though, is given the fact that New Orleans has struggled a bit on the interior. Misi has been very, very good in the minutes that he's been able to play. But I do think that this is a particularly tough matchup for him. Uh, Looking at what the Cavs can do here, I'd be looking for like Jared Allen props. I would be looking for um, I'd be looking for Evan Mobley props. When these two teams played a couple weeks ago, back on November 6th, they still had Zion Williamson in that matchup. Zion went kind of crazy. Jose Alvarado also went crazy. Um, but now it's a little bit of a different scenario. So Donovan Mitchell scored 29 points in that game. Jared Allen still had 16 points and 14 rebounds. I would be looking at him once again to have a big day on the glass and on the interior against the rookie that's Yves Missi. I think Missi's very good, but at the same time, I think that this is a very tough uh, situation for him to be in on a back-to-back. I know that they limited his minutes a little bit today against Dallas, but Jared Allen should be able to take him to school in this game. So I'm going to be keeping my eye out for those props. I don't see them just yet. So, but that's definitely the angle that I'm going to be targeting in that game. The next game that we need to look at is the Indiana Pacers versus the Houston Rockets. The Rockets are 6.5-point favorites, opened at 5.5. I lean the Rockets here. One of the things that was going around NBA Twitter recently was that Tyrese Halliburton is just absolute cheeks on the road, and like his home road splits are just insane. Like he's a totally different player on the road versus at home. So what did I have to do? I had to look it up. I had to find out what it was so I could tell you. At home, he is scoring 20.8 points, 3.3 rebounds, 8.8 assists. On the road, 12.6 points, 4 rebounds, 8.3 assists. So we don't really see like a super downturn in terms of the assists. We actually see a little bit of an uptick in the rebounds, but the scoring has been booty. And it's from an efficiency standpoint. His field goal percentage drops from 46% to 31%, and 3-point drops from 39% to 20%. So, Joe, where is this game? This game is on the road in Houston. I'm not totally certain that I want to buy into the home road split thing entirely. Sometimes that can be a little bit noisy, but at the same time, it's definitely something to monitor. It's definitely a reason to not bet on him in this game, just based on what we're seeing, based on this little bit of history here. So that's definitely something to kind of keep your eye on. Another thing is that centers have really torched, just absolutely torched Indiana on the interior, and that would make me want to look at Şengün. It would make me want to look a little bit at Jabari Smith. Jabari Smith's points line right now is at 11.5. In 4 games against Indiana over the past couple of seasons since 2022, he's gone over this in 3 of 4. He's got one game at 12, another game every game is at least in double digits, and he's averaging 18 against Indiana. So I think that's a spot to monitor, because Şengün, to me, Şengün can score, but like that's not really what his game is per se. Like he's a little bit more of an all-around contributor, and it's rare. I would say that it's rare that we're seeing him take all that many shots. Like he'll take, 15 shots. His season high this year is 22. He took against Charlotte, and he took 21 in the last game against Milwaukee. But even when he took 21, he only scored 18 points. So it's not that he's just not always looking for that. So that's kind of my problem with going with Şengün. I think that honestly, like some of these lines, I'm seeing 22.5 at Caesars and at MGM, whereas FanDuel's got a 20.5 right now. I would honestly almost consider betting an under, even though Indiana has been so bad against centers. I mean, like just even recently, like they just gave up that monster game to Pirtle last time out there. So that's my hesitation, but like I would almost rather pivot off of that and go towards Jabari Smith. Lower line, I know that's not a number that he's really hit recently. However, given the history, given the way that they give up points to on the interior, I think that could be a spot for Jabari Smith. But I think I really just need to kind of lay off of it for now. I will say that one player that did stand out to me, though, was Miles Turner. Miles Turner has gone over his points line, which is 16 and a half, in 5 of 5 games against the Houston Rockets over the past couple of seasons. And a lot of that wasn't even in big minutes. He was doing this in like 23, 24 minutes a game. Now, if we look at him, he's averaging 32 minutes a game this season. And over his last 10, we're seeing him at about 33. Pretty much every game, for the most part, in like the upper 20s, low 30s, no games below 25 minutes. Looking at these games against Houston, historically, he only had one game where he even touched the 30s. So to me, I think that this is a decent matchup for Turner, given what Houston kind of puts out there defensively. Şengün is not a particularly strong defensive center. And Miles Turner is obviously, I think, going to be able to stretch him out and help spread the floor. So I do think this is going to be a pretty good opportunity for Turner. And honestly, I think the spot that may be even more favorable to target might even be the first quarter. So Miles Turner's first quarter line is 4.5. And when we look at what Turner has done so far this season, in the first quarter, he's actually scoring the bulk of his points. He's scoring 4.9 points out of his full game average, which is 17.6. So he's scoring roughly 33-ish, like 30-ish percent of his points in the first quarter. Looking at compared to the rest of the game. So I do think that this is an opportunity where you could play both. I'm comfortable at 16 and a half points, but I also like the first quarter angle at 4.5 points. And I think that that's a spot where he's gone over that. Not 5 of 5 against Houston. It's been in 4 of 5, but the one miss was because he didn't play like a typical rotation for him in the first quarter. And that was, I think, due to foul trouble. Yeah, it was due to foul trouble a couple seasons ago. So other than that, that's really your big risk. He's like, is he going to commit a lot of fouls? But he's been able to stay on the court recently. He scored 6, 6, 8, and 6 in his last 4 games in the first quarter. His usage is high. His usage is at about 22%, it's like 23% in the first quarter this season. And when you compare that to some of his full game numbers, it's relatively in line. But there definitely is an uptick in terms of his overall scoring volume. There's a little bit more plays run for him. A lot of times Indiana kind of starts the game with a 3-point attempt from Miles Turner. So it's definitely just a spot that I want to attack here. And so I'm going to split my wager between Miles Turner, 16.5 points, and over 4.5 first quarter points. Looking at the next game, we have the Portland Trailblazers and the Oklahoma City Thunder. This game is going to be fascinating. Oklahoma City on a back-to-back. They just, what did they lose this game by? Now, let me look. They wound up losing this game 110 to 104 to the San Antonio Spurs. Big games, too, from Shea. Shea, 32 points. J-Dub, 27 points. But it just wasn't enough against Chris Paul and the Wemby-less Spurs. Chris Paul had a 14-point, 11 assist, and 5 rebound game. So the reason I say this is interesting, though, is this is definitely a game that if you're Oklahoma City, you don't want to fall into the like, well, we're going to let these bad teams kind of hang around. So that's critically important, right? Also, the Blazers have been interesting on the interior because the Blazers have been running like Robert Williams and they've been running Donovan Clingan. The Blazers right now, I think that they're still without DeAndre Ayton's listed as doubtful. Anthony Simons is listed as questionable for this game. So if Ayton is out, I'm going to be absolutely looking at Robert Williams and I'm going to be looking at Donovan Clingan stuff for this game. We saw that pick and roll just working wonderfully. Players were cutting against the Oklahoma City Thunder in this game that the Spurs just won. And I think that's probably the way that you have to attack that small ball lineup, just continually running pick and roll and attacking the rim. And given the number of bigs that they have, I think that that's a pretty good opportunity. So might be looking at their props, might be looking, if Simons is out, might be looking at Scoot Henderson assists, just for the ability to hit those guys in the pick and roll. Those are a couple of the angles that I'm looking at for that Blazers Oklahoma City game. Look, Oklahoma City should take care of business, and there's absolutely blowout risk. But Portland, they're in the developmental year anyway, so I'm not as concerned about betting on their team as maybe a different team in the same situation. Looking at the Philadelphia 76ers versus the Memphis Grizzlies, there's a little bit more to unpack than normal here. There was obviously the report recently, like today or yesterday now for the time, when this is recording, or when you're listening to this, but there was a report that there was like the players only meeting or there was a meeting. I don't think it was players only, but there was a meeting amongst some of the players and staff where Tyrese Maxey was trying to hold Joel Embiid accountable, basically saying, like, you're late all the time, you don't show up. There's some issues with, I guess, effort, whatever. And Embiid, apparently took that okay. But then also was like, well, I don't like really understand like how I'm being used on the offense. I think I have this problem, I have this issue, I have this issue. And I thought it was, and then wound up blaming like Nick Nurse a little bit, pointing a finger there. And then it was interesting because then Nick Nurse points a finger and is like, well, I have to coach you guys harder. You guys need to practice harder. And that's kind of what the problem is. So I thought it was it's not so much it's interesting that like it happened, because these things happen. It's not crazy, especially for a team with like as high of aspirations as they are and starting the season 2-11. But the thing that's interesting is the way that it got out. It got out into the news. And I think that that's interesting because it's like somebody's obviously talking to Shams or talking to the media about these things. And then it's getting out and it's getting framed. And those are the types of things where when it's internal, it's fine. Like you might not even know that the players had a meeting or like that the team had a meeting. Instead, you hear about it, names are out there, and then it kind of gets, maybe people start weighing in on it, like I'm weighing in on it, and it can get, not that my commentary necessarily matters to them, but the news gets to it, the media gets to it, there's other players commenting on it, and it's kind of like a trouble situation. Like, is there an issue here? And those are all things that I think matter. Now, for this game against the Memphis Grizzlies, the Grizzlies, who played today, lost to the Denver Nuggets, now have to stay at home, host the Philadelphia 76ers. We don't know really like who's playing. We don't really know who is going to be in the rotation for Memphis. Memphis listed Marcus Smart is out for the game against the Nuggets. John Morant is still considered week to week. Zach Edey is also considered week to week. Now, this game against Philadelphia, you have to wonder now. It's like, okay, well, who's going to be playing? Because this is the type of game that Joel Embiid normally has like really showed up for, where like these other teams, like they don't have the same guys on the interior. So looking at Embiid's history versus Jaren Jackson Jr., he's been pretty good more recently. I think he struggled a little bit beginning of his career. There was a lot more Steven Adams there, but in the last two games, one in December 2022, 35, 11, and 8, and then February 23rd of 2023, 27, 19, and 6. Not a huge sample size though, so it'll be interesting to see where his points line comes out at and what he looks like, honestly. He looks a little bit ginger. He looks a little bit slow. We hit that nice under and his points under against Bam the other day when the Sixers played Miami. However, this game, it kind of gives the opportunity to maybe go the other way. Like I would be inclined to want to play like an over, but add that I don't know if I can really do that, especially at like a baseline at like minus 110. I think what I would do, it'll depend on where the lines come out. But if I can get like a juicy number for like 25 plus or maybe 30 plus or something like that, I would maybe play only the alt. And the reason I say that is when you play only the alt, it limits your exposure while still kind of giving you a lot of that upside that you're trying to bet into. So it's there's obviously a lot more variance involved in it because you're betting these like higher odds numbers with like lower probabilities of happening. But sometimes I think that it's better to just kind of shoot for the moon and say like, look, if they get over the line, they get over the line. That wasn't really the way that I was looking at this. When I looked at this line, I thought it was way too low. And I was like, am I missing something? Maybe he just isn't super healthy. But because I think it's too low and I want a little bit of a piece for this, I can bet the extreme and get a lot more value because if I'm right, I'm going to be really right and I'm going to get paid for being really right. And I think that that's kind of one of the things with, it's a little bit of an aside, but I think that's one of the things with betting, right? And people will be like, oh, like this is the worst bet ever. Like you missed this by like so much, or like, you know, you crushed this, like it hit like immediately. And the problem with, oh, AD just got nailed in the balls. The problem with that and that like way of thinking is like it doesn't really matter. Like it doesn't matter if I'm super right or not. Like it matters from a process perspective. It matters if my analysis was right. It matters if my cap was good and like the way that I was able to seek out the line was good. But it doesn't matter if my bet wins by like one stat, 10 stats, 50 stats. Like it literally doesn't matter. Like people look like you'll look like an idiot if you bet like 20 and a half points, right? You'll look like an idiot if he scores 50. But at the end of the day, like it doesn't really matter if he scored 50 or if he scored 21. It's the same amount of loss. So as long as your cap was like right, or maybe it wasn't right, but you could actually learn something off of it, then that's great. I think the problem is there's like a habit of when like you lose a bet by like a half a point or like whatever, and like I love the joke of like you got hooked. I like lost this by a hook when it was like home run bet. I love that. It's one of my favorites. But like anyway, the point of what I'm getting at is that like it just doesn't matter. Like I hate when people are like, oh, like I lost this by a hook. But it's like, yeah, but your analysis was like completely wrong. Like that's just not what happened at all. So it's like you might have lost it by a hook, but you were honestly probably lucky that you even got close to winning the bet. So I think that when people look at this, it's like these lines are sharp. Like the lines, most of the time, they're like the end result is going to be within like one standard deviation of like what the line is, right? But certain players aren't like that. And certain circumstances can lend themselves to being like highly variable. So when you think about it that way and you look at it, this is super mathy, but it's like if you're, I'm trying to explain this in like a little bit of a simpler way, but it's like if you have somebody who when they score, right? I love using Malik Monk as an example for this because he's kind of one of those guys that either scores like a million points or he scores no points. And sometimes he scores like 15. The reason that I like to use him as an example, though, is that his range of outcomes is so much wider than a guy like Shea. Shea is, if you pull up his game log, he is between 28 and 32 almost every fucking night. Like it's just every time. He's super, super consistent. So his like 75th and 25th percentile outcomes are a lot narrower. And I think it makes it harder to bet on like alts for a guy like Shea. Whereas a guy like Malik Monk, because he's so variable and because that he has these huge spikes in these spikes or valleys in what his output is, it creates opportunity for some of these ladder spots. And it's not even so much the ladder, it's that you're looking at like the 75th percentile outcome and better. Because if you're capping a thing in particular and you're like, I think that Malik Monk has a great matchup for X, Y, and Z reasons. If you compared it to other times when he's had this similar matchup, it's not that he's going over, like, let's say his line is like 13 and a half points. Like, he's not scoring 14 or 15. He's scoring 20, 21, 22, 25, whatever. That's what I'm trying to talk about here, where because of Joel Embiid's like health, because of the injury, because of the knee, because of the bad game last time, I think that it's possible that I think it was a bad matchup anyway. Now you get this meeting, there's an opportunity where maybe there's like a little bit of a fire lit under his ass, and it's a good matchup against the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, this is a spot where, depending on where the line comes out, I might say, like, okay, I don't think he's just going to go over like 20 and a half points or 22 and a half points. I think he's going to score 30. Like, I think that like he's going to go way over. If you're going to, like, it doesn't really matter if you're right or wrong when you're betting, because like it's a binary outcome. Like, it's just, the only thing that matters is like, did you win or did you lose, right? But that's kind of what I'm saying here. Like, if you think that you're going to be really right, and you think that the reason that you're going to be really right, the outcome is going to be like something that you can actually still bet on. Like, if you think that the two outcomes for tomorrow's game or for today's game for Joel Embiid are he scores under 15 points or like 30 plus, then you could bet on those two outcomes and basically say, like, I'm going to take these median outcomes that I think, or where this line is set, because the over under is always kind of set somewhere in the middle, right? Or like what the average is for him in terms of the modeling or their projections or however they want to set the line, right? If you say, I want to get rid of the middle 50% and I want to bet the top 25 and the bottom 25%, that's when you can start kind of creating an edge or creating opportunity for yourself without overexposing yourself on a bankroll spot. I'm not recommending to do this for everybody or for every player or for every circumstance, because that's like how you lose your ass, because ladders are just not always plus EV. Oftentimes they're negative EV because you're not really getting fair odds on what the ladder spots are. But for here, I think it could be a better opportunity to try to optimize what your cap is, because you're basically just saying, like, look, he's either healthy or he's not healthy. He doesn't really score in this part. Like, he just doesn't score. Like, he doesn't have outcomes here. Like, he doesn't have outcomes scoring like 21, 22, 23 points. He's either scoring 30 or he's scoring like under 20. And that's what I'm trying to say. So if you have an edge and you have an angle and you think that there's like a path for you, and it revolves around like an upper percentile outcome or a lower percentile outcome, then you should bet those and not like kind of stay mired in the middle where you don't really think the result's going to be anyway. So that's my spiel on some of these alt lines and Joel Embiid. The next game is the Atlanta Hawks versus the Golden State Warriors. The play that I was looking at here, and I was a little surprised about it, like off the rip, but Trae Young over 22 and a half points. He's 5 for 5 against Golden State over the last few seasons, averaging 30.2 points per game. Or I was looking at 32.5 points plus assists. He's averaging 41.4 against the Golden State Warriors. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity there for Trae Young. He just had a 7-point game. There's a total stinker of a game. But he had 19 dimes. So like, I hate with Trae, I hate leaving off assists whenever I do a combo, because he has that like crazy upside potential. And it's like he's one of those guys that can actually save a points line with his assists. It's not usually the other way. It can be the other way around, but it's not. It's atypical for somebody to be able to save their points line with the assists. He's somebody that can really go like way over his assist line and save the points line, or like in the combo prop. The other guy that I think has like a decent matchup is Jalen Johnson. I think that if his line is at 17 and a half points, I think that that might be like a touch low. I honestly think that given the number of players, like the number of guys in that team, I, I'm a little concerned with their wing depth, like what the minutes are always going to look like or what the usage is. So that's kind of one of the concerns. That's one of the concerns that I have. I will say we might actually finally get a good price on Dyson Daniels steals again, though, because he recorded no steals in the last game that they had, but he had 4 blocks. So his steals line, let's check it out right now. His steals line, nope, still not a good line. It's over 2.5 minus 129 at Caesars. I would consider this spot. It's a tougher spot against Golden State, I think, given their style of ball, and then also given the minutes that I'm not really sure what Dyson's minutes are going to be, but at the same time, I think it's super promising that he still played 39 minutes in their last game out against Sacramento and didn't really see any downturn when like Bogey returned. So I think that that's great news for him. I think it's great news for Dyson Daniels' opponents or supporters, and Dyson Daniels, the great barrier thief, or if you if you will. I am looking up though right now. I wanted to see what teams do in terms of turning the ball over. And when we look at teams that turn the ball over, Golden State's about middle of the pack. So I think the 2.5 is a fair line, but it's not one that I need right now. There has been a little bit of a regression from him, and I'm okay like sitting it out. I don't have to go in and bet it, even though I think that it's fun. I think that it could be a good spot for him. But the minutes are still there, but 2.5 is still just it's a little bit too high for my taste. Next, we're looking at I'm going to save the Knicks for last. We're going to go to the Orlando Magic versus the Los Angeles Clippers. The Magic are 2.5-point road favorites against the Clippers. Looking at this game, I have the Orlando Magic. They're 8th in adjusted net, plus 3.3 in adjusted net rating. They're still abysmal on offense, but they're 2nd in defense. The Clippers are actually like surprisingly pretty good. They're 14th in adjusted net, plus 1.1. 15th in adjusted offense. For the game, looking at my rhythm model here, I don't have like a real discernible edge on this game at all. It has it basically right on the nose at the 2.5 points, and the total basically right on the nose at 206. So it's a stay away for me. I've been a little bit surprised with the way that Wagner just keeps Wagner honestly just keeps scoring, and he's really like improved in terms of his efficiency. He's really improved in his overall output. 27 and a half points to me seems astronomically high, but he's consistently hitting it. My kind of caution is, and it's something I'm a little bit surprised about, right? Is when I'm looking at these teams in pace, the Magic are 25th, the Clippers are 21st. These games that Wagner has been, going over this line against some of his prior opponents, Phoenix, they play at a slow pace. Philly, slow pace. Indiana has slowed down a bit, but they still play fast. Charlotte, slow pace. Washington, he missed against, but that was, I think it was more, it was just that he didn't play a ton of minutes. So Wagner's actually doing this against all these teams that are playing slow. I think I want to hold off on playing him against the Clippers, but I do think there's going to be an opportunity where he might just go way over the line, given the fact that he's going to finally get a real pace up spot. And it's like, you keep looking at it and you're saying like, well, we should fade him. Like, when are we going to fade him? Are we ever going to fade him? And like, it never seems to happen. But I do think there's going to be a pretty good opportunity to go over for him sometime in like the relatively the relatively near future. And the other thing that's been surprising with Franz is that the turnovers have not been there either. He's not turning the ball over despite this real significant uptick in usage. And I think that that's pretty great for him. I do think we could look at Harden turnovers. He's at over 3.5. There's a 3.5 out there, which I think is a little bit too low. He's gone over this in 10 of 15 games this season, averaging 4.4. I think that we're getting the 3.5 because he just went under in back-to-back games against the Warriors and against the Utah Jazz. So he had 3 against the Warriors. The Magic's defense is just stifling. And, Harden, he's obviously the clear engine of this offense right now. A lot of passing the ball, a lot of opportunities to have some turnovers. So I would be looking at Harden over 3.5 turnovers. I think I would drink that juice at -148. It's something that I'm interested in, and I will send it out in the Action app or in the Discord if that is something that I ultimately decide to play. Finally, we've got the Knicks versus the Phoenix Suns, and the spot. Honestly, like I feel like such a homer. Like I feel like I'm just like yelling into the clouds, right? But for this game, Miles McBride is out again already. They ruled him out. It's not great that they keep ruling him out so early. Precious Achiuwa ruled out as well. And for the Phoenix Suns, Bradley Beal's not playing. Yusuf Nurkic is questionable. And Kevin Durant is also out. I want to bet karl-Anthony Towns PRA, and I feel like I just keep trying, like wanting to go back here. I just think that he's been tremendous this season, and PRA is at 42.5. It's a monster number. FanDuel's got that. However, let's make sure that this is right, because I have seen this where FanDuel's been opening some of these lines like high, and they're almost like not in line with what the rest of the market's at. So, yeah, MGM's got it at 40.5. That's a play. That kind of open here now. So Cat, he's hit this only in 5 of 13 games this season. He's averaging 41.6. So it's kind of one of those things where it's getting pulled up by some of the ceiling performances. However, a big part of why I like this is I think that there might be like tremendous rebound upside for him in this spot. And the rebound upside is coming from the fact that if Nurkic doesn't play, he's going to get a lot of minutes like playing opposite of Mason Plumlee. And Plumlee is not a good rebounder. When Plumlee was on the Hornets a couple of years ago, and that was a spot where we just continually bet everybody against him. He not only has Towns been a tremendous rebounder for the Knicks in general this season, but some of those guys like Plumlee, he's not always playing in a drop. And because he's not always playing in a drop, it does open them up a little bit more for rebounding opportunities on both the offensive side of the ball, and then on the defensive side of the ball, they oftentimes are spacing Plumlee out in like not on the perimeter, but like kind of like a little off of the dunker spot, trying to keep the lane open, but that allows Cat to kind of stay there. So I really like the rebounding upside. I like the scoring upside here because Plumlee's obviously not a good defensive player. And I think that this is a really, really strong opportunity for Anthony Towns against a Phoenix team that allows a ton of points to centers, a ton of points in the paint, a ton of defensive rebounds. I really like the spot for karl-Anthony Towns. So I'm going to grab him over 40.5 PRA, and you can get that at -110 on MGM. So the rest of the week, we do have some interesting games. It should be pretty fun. I will say that the Thursday slate is light. There's a Pistons Hornets game. I'm going to be really interested in maybe doing like a little double-double, triple-double thing with Cade and LaMelo. I'll be curious to see how that goes, especially after like LaMelo got benched, it almost seemed like today. And then Friday we got group like cup game stuff. Mavs versus Nuggets is going to be awesome. I would imagine Jokic is back for that game. So wait and see where that line pops up at. But I would definitely be interested in Denver there. It's a home game for Denver. Jokic is going to be like first game dad strength. I think that's a great spot to back the Denver Nuggets with a fresh and healthy and maybe like a little bit of like rejuvenated Jokic for that game. So I'm going to be looking at Denver. I'm going to be looking at Jokic in that spot. Now, I want to talk a little bit about account health briefly. One of the things that I try to do and I think is good is like when there's certain promos, like one guy I follow on Twitter, Mr. Limit, is really good at talking about some of this stuff. But like they had on DraftKings, they had a Team USA promo the other day. And basically it was a Christian Pulisic to score a goal and for the United States to win. And it was like boosted to plus 200 or something. And he was basically like, even if you don't want to bet this, like, even like, it doesn't matter what the EV of this is so much. It's like, this is the most like, if you don't like, if you bet this, they're going to be like, oh yeah, like, no, this guy's a casual, like, doesn't matter. Like, it probably wasn't like a great bet. Honestly, it hit, which is sick. But the main point of it is that when these sports books are kind of looking at your accounts and a lot of it's automated, it's based off of some of the activity, like what you bet, when you bet it, how you bet it, the amounts that you bet it. And it can like essentially like trigger like a tripwire for what, like whether or not your account needs to get flagged for whatever reason. Right. And if you bet on some of these promos that are like clearly minus EV, but they're fun, they're like local team related, they're Team USA related, those types of things, it can help your account because they're saying like, oh no, like this guy bets casually, like he didn't, there's no way, like if every bet that you make is super sharp on a book, because they're saying like, oh yeah, like that was a bad line, or like, oh yeah, this one moved that way, or he bet this at like basically the second it dropped. He bet this at like a super large amount, like relative to his other amounts, and then he came back and bet something else or whatever. Or they're like, or you're always trying to cherry pick like bad lines, because maybe they're like an error line or something like that. Those are things that can flag your account. But if you're playing some of these odds boosts, if you're throwing in a couple parlays, if you're throwing some things in that aren't correlated, it can create a situation where it helps your account health in the long run. One of the things that some people do is if you get into account, basically it's like the first thing they'll do is they'll bet on the home team, and bet it at like $100. Doesn't matter really whether they win or lose, but they'll just bet that and they'll leave that and they'll bet a couple props, only overs. And like they'll do that with an account for like a week or two to try to like groom the account essentially. And by doing that, it helps keep that account's longevity because it kind of takes it off the radar. It's like not so much a new account anymore. It got filtered in. It's like, nope, it's casual. It's good. And that's a way that you can kind of keep an account a little bit longer. If you go and every time you open the account, you're only looking to bet like super sharp lines or like super bad lines, your activity is not only is it going to be like variable, it's going to be like random almost, but it's going to be very specifically targeting bad lines or opportunistic lines. And it's not that you're not allowed to do that. You're totally allowed to do that. You're more than welcome to do that. But the books are also, unfortunately, allowed to limit us. They're allowed to restrict your play. Like they're allowed to essentially lower your limits. And when you do that, it creates a situation where you don't have as many outs. And this is what I think is the most important part of this whole thing is like, how many outs do you have? Because when it comes to betting in particular, the biggest thing we always talk about is like, you need the line shop. Like you always want the best line at every time because you're saving yourself a little bit of money or you're making a little bit more money, right? And the associated implied probability with those lines is more or less favorable for you if you're finding the best line for where you can bet it. If you don't have as many books, you can't do that. And then even then, like let's say you have one book, or let's say you have 10 books, right? And you can bet a unit on all of them and you're comfortable betting that. and you can normally do that. That's so much better because you have the ability to bet on. You're able to diversify your portfolio in terms of the sports books, but you're also able to get down on a variety of different lines, right? The problem is, like, if you start losing some of them, then all of a sudden you're like, well, like, I can't get down at this line anymore. So I think this is a good bet. I want to get down on it. But now I have to say, like, well, I can only get down a partial unit on the best line, and then on the next book I can bet like a little bit here, and then this other book they offer it too, but like the line is bad, so like I can't even get down a full unit on this play anymore. So that's why I think it's so important to not only have a lot of books at your disposal, but then to also try to diversify your risk. And the reason I think it's important to have them almost like all at once is that it lets you spread your betting out a little bit more evenly. Whereas, like, if you have one book or two books and that's it, and you're hitting them all the time on like sharp bets or sharp angles, whatever, if you lose one of them, you're cooked. And then if you go to open up another book and then your initial activity, like your opening activity, is all sharp activity, your accounts run the risk of getting that account flagged a lot faster. Whereas, like, if you have a spread out account and you throw a couple parlays in there, you bet on a promo here and there, you bet like a couple superstar player props, like those types of things. Maybe you hold off on playing a couple unders. Like, sometimes you need to lose or like run like slightly negative EV opportunities in the immediate to open up long-term positive EV situations for yourself in the future. So that's some of the ways that you can kind of do that. Some of my thoughts on the topic anyway. So now we're at Pods and Recs, and producer Corey, he recommended vitamin C to the listeners. It is that time of year where people are getting sick, and like my son is sick a little bit right now. So I totally sympathize with producer Corey giving out the vitamin C recommendation. For me, I am going to recommend. What did I do today? Oh, my recommendation is going to be, remember to take out your turkey to defrost it in advance. Because I would save this normally for like next week because it's Thanksgiving week. But I do think that I would run the risk of like you guys maybe not hearing this recommendation early enough. So like don't take the turkey out now, but there's some like directions about how exactly you need to take it out, the time that you need to let it defrost, how you're going to let it defrost, whatever. So make sure that you do that. Get the bird out there and make sure that it's defrosted for Thanksgiving, so that way you don't have to cook or try to cook or do something with a frozen bird, because that would not be ideal. So I'm going to recommend that. And I'm going to recommend chicken cutlets because we got Tommy Cutlets back at quarterback for the New York Football Giants, and it's cutlet season. So get yourself a nice cutlet, whether you make it, whether you buy it. Maybe throw it on a little semolina, get a little arugula, a little sharp provolone, maybe a little roasted red pepper. You could go balsamic glaze, a little olive oil, call it a day. Have yourself a sandwich, have yourself a little cutlet over there, and it'll be great for you to enjoy while you're looking at rhythm, checking out the app, and making sure that you have some of the best things, some of the best modeling in the game. And like, if you don't really know what the best decision is going to be, if you don't really know how to make a model, you can tell Rhythm, these are the things that I think are important, and they will create a model for you with all their stuff on the back end. All you have to do is say, I care about this stat, and this stat, and they will spit out a model, and you can track that and see if it's profitable long term. So get Rhythm for a month or for a week for free, rather. Use the link in the bio, and it'll help you continue to cash that. Get those chicken cutlets, keep it up the good work, and let's continue to cash that.